It's a constant juggle. However, the last thing I'd want to be doing would be being quiet and sitting at home and not doing anything. You know, this is the happy place. It's just reminding yourself that you are actually doing the thing that makes you happy.
Welcome back to Artfully Crafted. My name is Alienor, and each week I travel to a craft person's studio, interview them and show you their work. This week we're headed to Hampshire to meet with stone sculptor Zoe Wilson. I first came across Zoe's work on Instagram back in 2020, where she's amassed a following of over 160,000 people. Clearly, I am not the only one who appreciates how distinctive her work is, with British stone and geometry at its core. So don't forget to hit the subscribe button and let's get into it. Hi Zoe.
Hi.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
We're here in your studio in lovely Hampshire. And it's a really lovely space. And you mentioned to me that you haven't been here very long.
No,
right?
since August. So, moving studios is about the thing I like the least in life, because every time I do, I think, gosh, I should have taken up jewellery or something much lighter rather than stone carving.
I was going to say, I've seen you sort of like this morning as we were prepping the interview, you were sort of like casually lifting things, and then I went to lift something and I was like, nope, no.
But it's a very specific muscle group. I'm rubbish with anything else, but lifting a heavy piece of stone, I'm fine. But no, I'm hoping to stay here for a lot longer. So it's been a process of sort of bedding in, getting to know the space, you know, getting things placed where you want them to, but it's starting to feel like home now, and it was definitely the right move. So yeah, I'm really happy here.
So you've mentioned stone. Could you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a stone carver, and I carve geometric patterns into British stone.
Okay, so what type of stones do you use?
I sort of have 3 or 4 favourite stones.
Yeah.
It sounds a bit niche to say I have favourite stones, but Portland limestone, which comes from the south coast of the UK. That's this buff coloured limestone. There's a red sandstone, which is these 2 pieces behind you here. This like pinky red colour. That's a Scottish sandstone called Course Hill. Yeah. Welsh slate is another absolute favourite of mine. It's really dark and smooth. And there's another couple that I kind of use less often, but I probably actually those 3 are my the ones that I use the most.
So you gravitate towards the same sort of stone.
Bath stone is probably the other one that I would include in there, but really it's those 3 main ones for the geometric patterns that are the nicest.
But you are able to work in all stones?
Yeah,
presumably?
absolutely. I just have found over the years that I find a real connection with British stone just because it's our bedrock. And what I started to realise after a while is when you're working with a piece of stone, you spend a long time with it. And so, although I know roughly how any piece of Portland will carve, each piece has its own idiosyncrasies and kind of character. And it's really nice when you get to know them. What I started to notice was when it was British stone, I had more of a connection with that stone. And so that's why now I choose to carve British stones. Also much better for the environment, not shipping them around the world. And I wanted to support the fact that we have such amazing stones in the UK. You don't have to use an Italian marble for it to be an amazing piece of sculpture.
So could we talk a little bit about the process of your pieces?
Yeah, sure. So I usually start sketching on paper. I really like to play with a pair of compasses and just see what patterns evolve. After I've done that, I've found a pattern that I'm comfortable with and happy, and it sort of maybe answers the questions that I was asking. I draw that directly onto the stone. I usually etch it on so it's permanent. I learnt that the hard way, that if you draw it in pencil and you're leaning on it the whole time whilst you're carving, you can rub it off. And if it's a geometric pattern, you might have lost the centre point by that time, and so you can't then remark it on. So I now scribe it on, which is much more long lasting.
Durable,
I then carve the pattern using surprisingly simple tools, just a mallet and maybe 2 or 3 chisels. And then once the piece is finished, I now really like to get it 3D scanned. I started making prints of my work, and by 3D scanning them I get to play with the scale of that piece. I guess for me as a sculptor, it's a way of firstly documenting my work, but also being able to produce a limited edition cast of it is the same for a painter being able to produce prints.
Yeah.
And so it's a really nice way of offering another tier to the business of things that you can produce. So this is a 3D print. The original is behind us there. So I had it scanned, played with the scale of it. I think it's nice to not produce it exactly the same scale, so there's a difference. There is only ever one original at that size.
Right.
And then this is the print. And actually through the process, we also worked to make a really neat little plinth for it to stand on, because it was one of the things I wasn't quite sure with this piece, was to how to actually to stand it. And then we ended up printing, need to get back. We ended up printing one at the right scale for that piece to stand on. Right. So that is now standing on a 3D print of a base for it. So it's a really interesting that through these processes you quite often find there are other applications that you maybe hadn't thought of. And then once it's printed, we can then take a silicone rubber mould of the piece, and then I get the additions poured in jesmonite, which is gypsum and resin. Which is this one, and this one also has 50% bronze powder in it as well. And this one has a really nice weight to it, so it's kind of looks back at the weight of the stone. It has a nice grounding.
Yeah, so you decide on the scale when it's 3D scanned, and then by the time it's printed, that's in the scale that you're going to be using at.
And I think normally I have an idea of why I want it to be a particular scale, or so far I have done. So that's quite a nice, I sort of had that idea before we've started the process as to whether I'd like it to be larger, smaller, really small. So yeah, that's a nice process. The other thing I sometimes do is take a silicone mould of the original, because if I'm not going to play with the scale of it, then there's no point in going through that process. You may as well just take a mould from the original and pour that. So that's my other way of doing it.
Okay, so diversifying and offering more options.
Which
through
is
reproduction.
Which is kind of really necessary in a business, to have that different tiers of products that you can sell. And also, I really enjoy the carving, so I spend my time doing that. It's really nice. I have other people, a really great lady who makes my jesmonite cast for her, and I really trust Emma's abilities, and she's a master of jesmonite, so it's really nice to be able to, for her to be able to do that side, and for me to be able to sell pieces that is not directly taking my time, so that then I can invest my time in the original carvings.
And then there's photography as well, right?
So I have some lovely prints as well. This started because I found it really hard to let pieces go. It was a little bit like saying goodbye to a friend, and I didn't like it. So I started just taking iPhone snaps of my pieces, and then actually somebody asked if they could buy one, and I realised there was a corner of the market that I was missing. And I've now been fortunate enough to have my work photographed by Julian Calder, and he's an amazingly talented photographer. And the last shoot we did, I took 8 pieces, I think, to his studio in London, and it felt to me like a spa day for my work. It was really lovely, because his attention to detail with light and shade was just, it was incredible. And light and shade is the thing that finishes my work and completes it. And for him to spend all this time getting the lighting perfect on one in a snapshot was deeply satisfying, but also just really nice that somebody's spending that time in appreciating your work and showing it in its best possible light, quite literally. So I'm really fortunate to be able to work with Julian and produce limited edition prints of my pieces as well. Yeah,
because from looking around your studio, I do think there's quite a lot of thought put into the presentation, right? For you, that's quite an important part as well.
Yeah, I think maybe especially working with stone. Definitely for the pieces that are sitting on a table, I find it really important that people could turn them, because it depends where your light source is as to how you might want that to sit. And I think it's really nice to be able to be involved with it. You know, I think it's good to be able to touch it and feel it and turn it if you want to. For wall hanging pieces, I found initially there was a slight barrier. I think people were worried about how you would hang such a heavy piece of work and the weight, and the practical side of, you know, how do I display that in my home? So I have a bracket system where I supply the bracket, you attach the bracket to the wall. It's very nice and easy because you're not holding anything heavy at that point. And then the stone has a corresponding bracket, which is glued, and it's actually carved into the back of it as well. So it's really strong. And then once it's all in place, you can just hang it on the wall. So I think there does have to be quite a consideration of that side to the work for people to be able to access it, I think.
It's my understanding that you started with a fine art degree, is that right?
Yeah, in painting.
Okay. Yeah. So very far from this.
Yeah. There was also definitely a point where I vowed I was never going to be an artist, which I find quite funny now because I've definitely come a full circle from not wanting to do it to coming to terms with the fact that I actually just was an artist and then leaning into it again.
So what was it about studying fine arts that made you feel like you didn't want to be an artist?
So my degree was very conceptual. I'm not actually sure if it was very conceptual or maybe I just came to a realisation that I now understand there's a huge need for concept behind artwork, and there is of course always a reason why I'm making something, but I think my degree really lent into that being the most important part, and it was almost looking at the theoretical side behind the artwork rather than the artwork. Yeah. And so what I can now see is that I found it really difficult because I didn't at the time know that I was actually a maker. And so I was really interested in the process of paint, not just why I was using the colour blue and the ideas behind it. So I left the 3 years feeling very kind of frustrated because I don't think I felt I'd learnt what I had thought I was going to learn.
You wanted to see the technical side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I almost wanted to be taught like the old masters were taught, you know, to really understand the craft of painting. But I didn't have the knowledge to articulate that at the time, so I just found it quite frustrating.
So you did eventually go to City and Guilds Art School, and that's where you got that very sort of traditional stone carving knowledge. But you sort of had a bit of a route getting there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I don't think anybody really sets out to be a stone carver. No. So I left I completed my degree, and I needed some money. So I said yes to any job. Some of them were particularly unsuitable, like being a barrister's clerk. That was not me at all. But one of them was making granite kitchen work surfaces. And I just immediately loved being in this workshop environment. We were making a product, and at that point that felt really meaningful because it's a thing we hadn't been doing at art school. It was a tangible thing where somebody came in, ordered it. You had the craftsmanship of making it. I got to play with some really big saws. I got my forklift truck driving licence. I really, really loved the environment, and I loved that type of work where you are employed but working with others to make something. I really valued that. So that was the first kind of lead into it.
Like small aha moment kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely for me at that point, nothing to do with the fact it was stone. I think probably when people look at my work now, they assume that I've always loved stone. And actually at that point, it was the aha moment of just the process of it. Yeah, absolutely. And then sort of from there, it's been really a serendipitous journey of meeting people, saying yes to the right opportunities. There certainly wasn't a clear path. So the first job led on to a really informal apprenticeship with a stonemason who happened to come in, and we got chatting, and I did a little bit of work experience with him, and then he said, look, I've got room in the business for an apprentice. I really didn't want to go back to college, so it was just on job, like I say, very informal, traditional in the sense of following your master craftsman around and learning on the job. Very untraditional because I was just given an angle grinder on day one. I mean, that was very trusting of him, I feel, as well. But normally, as an apprentice stonemason, you'd be given, I mean, you wouldn't even be given a mallet and chisel. You'd literally be sweeping the floors, you know, sharpening tools, that kind of thing. And then you might get loose with a mallet and chisel. Whereas I got given a 9-inch angle grinder, and I had to very much produce enough work to support me being in the business.
Right.
So it was a very different education. It was very much about speed.
So did you get taught any technique before being told, right, now it's all about speed?
Yes, but again, just in a really informal way.
Right.
So it's very much this is the job that's in the workshop at the moment, the banker workshop. And, you know, this is the architect's drawing, this is how you read the drawing. We need to make a template of this particular moulding. Mm-hmm. You apply the template onto the stone and then you cut it. And I would have been starting with the slightly more simple ones. And then it was just, I guess, the complexity of those things increased over time.
So it's like quite unstructured approach to learning.
That's a really good way to say it. It was completely unstructured, which I didn't realise, again, at the time, didn't suit me particularly well. Mm-hmm. As much as I didn't want to go back into formal education, what I did want was to know why we were doing stuff. And I don't think I probably got that as well through that, you know, as much through that job. Mm-hmm. But it was interesting because it exposed me to all sorts of, you know, working out on site. It was probably the fittest I've ever been in my life because you had to carry really big chunks of stone up and down ladders. Yeah. And, you know, you were seeing them being fixed in place. So I understood why things were the way they were. You know, pieces of stone quite often go a long way back into a building. And it's so that they are cantilevered right and so they're safe. And so seeing the fixing side really made me understand why we were making the pieces in the workshop like we were.
But did you feel like when you then went to Sicilian Guilds and you had, you know, the opposite, you basically had the very, very structured learning, was it almost like back to basics, but then you got to see kind of like the holes in your knowledge?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I do remember, so Nina Bilbey was my senior tutor whilst I was there. And I do remember conversations with Nina where she'd say, but surely you know this? And I'm like, no, I really don't. And it was really interesting to see these massive gaps. And Nina suddenly being like, how have you never done this? And I'd say to her, like, I've just always done it with an angle grinder. And she'd say, yeah, I don't even understand how you can do it with an angle grinder. I was like, it's a lot faster. And so, yeah, it was really interesting seeing the gaps later on. Yeah. And I think when you do these things at the time, you don't realise that there are gaps. Mm-hmm. It was quite an education into the building industry. Yeah. And maybe also how I didn't want to run my business. And those things sat really uncomfortably with me as well. You know, there's just so much lying within the industry. And I'm fundamentally a really honest person. So I really struggled with that. Yeah. Because if there was a client and I was left in the room with a client, I found it so hard to not say, you know, we don't even have your stone yet. You know? So, you know, so that side of it I found really uncomfortable. Yeah. But yeah, a really interesting start and oddly a really good grounding and like information that I use all the time today of how to fix things, just even knowing how to...
Well, it's like muscle memory.
It's muscle memory, but even knowing like what type of glue to use and all of those things that I'm using on a daily basis within my work now came from that training. So
yeah, and there is something to be said for that on-the-job training versus structured education, where in a way like the structured education can miss out some of its real practical, like here's the collision with real world and like how you adapt and
even like the weather, you know, and the temperature outside. Can you use this thing when it's -5 or not? There was one winter where we were making a fireplace, and when stone gets cut, it's cut on a wet saw to reduce the dust and the friction, and it had been stacked up outside our workshop. And then it froze. It froze together, And so there was then a what do you do when this client wants their fireplace in for Christmas and it's 2 weeks before Christmas and your stone is frozen back into a block, basically. and we didn't have anywhere warm enough to, so we ended up taking it to the client's house and putting it in his garage with heaters on. But then there was this other side to it, that if you heat stone too rapidly in one place, it discolours and it goes pink. And so there was lots of, exactly as you say, on-job, other environment things that are happening, which was, those things you need to experience it firsthand.
Yeah.
And you need there to be problems to be able to learn. So,
and that will stick in your mind much more than, being taught it in a classroom environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
As you say, like those moments of being like, oh my God, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
Like problem solve.
Yeah.
Versus doing that in a classroom, it just doesn't,
Yeah. Actually, that's interesting about the problem solving as well, because I think the thing that I learnt as a life lesson during that time, more than anything else, is how you deal with a mistake. And I think we grow up seeing mistakes as a really negative thing. Even the word mistake, it's very hard to find a language to describe something going wrong, but sometimes it's not actually your doing. Because let's say the stone has got a crack in it that you can't see. You do something called ringing stone, where you tap it with your chisel to make sure it makes a true sound.
Yeah.
And when you ring it, if it sounds a bit dead, it's usually got some sort of crack in it. But sometimes you ring the stone and it sounds absolutely fine, and when you've been working on it for a while, a crack opens up. And you can't, what do you do then? Depends where it is, do you open up the crack, glue it back together, pin it and repair it? Do you start again? What do you do? And it's this feeling that actually sometimes things happen that you can't place blame on this being my fault, or can you say that it's the stone's fault? And to not have this immediate reaction of something's gone wrong, it's rubbish, throw it away, or to get angry about it. And in the workshop, it was very much, whether it was a personal error or something you couldn't foresee, it was very much a calm moment of, you verbalise it first, this has happened, you stop working on it, rather than making rash decisions. It might be that somebody else can see the solution straight away. And actually to have that calm moment of, I just need to work around it with some creative thinking, is something I absolutely use in everyday life, whether it's through carving or just through any experiences of not panicking when something goes wrong, and actually owning it. And one thing the company I was working for was really good at was not telling you off for it. And so it was a much safer environment to say, oh, this has gone wrong, what do we do? And making it about it being a group thing of like, okay, like messing up happens to absolutely everybody, no matter their skill level. It's just a part of life. So now that this has happened, what can we do to fix it and come up with a solution? It's a much healthier work environment for sure. And also as an apprentice, you are the one that's making the most mistakes, because you're the one that has the least knowledge. So of course you're the one that's going to be, the boss of most of these mistakes, but you need the experience. That also comes from pricing that in. I think lots of, when you don't have the business experience, when it's your first few commissions, you might be tempted to price things for the best case scenario. And actually, like I've seen that through working with different creative businesses, that like it is all about allowing, making some allowance for things going wrong, because they will, they always will. And also, even if something doesn't go wrong in one job, it could be that they go spectacularly wrong with another. So you need to have a bit of buffer in every job, so that, as you say, when things do go wrong, it's not panic stations. Exactly. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But that was a really interesting point of that sort of time in my life, was really dealing with mistakes. Was a really interesting point. And so how did you go from there to, you told me you had a big job in Wales, is that right? Yeah, so I got made redundant. Because, as I said, the business wasn't necessarily run in the most legitimate way. And I got made redundant, which at the time felt awful. Sorry, I'm laughing at you saying redundant. I'm not laughing at that. I'm laughing at you saying about the reason business. Why. I was trying to put it in a polite way. I got made redundant, and with all these things, it feels like the worst thing, but actually turned out to be the best thing. Because I also suspect I was getting to the point where I probably needed to move on. But quite often when you're comfortable in a job, you're not going to do that. So it was probably the right time to do that. And just, again, a really serendipitous moment. I was a keen rower and I was coaching my rowing team. And one of the members of the team was building an extension on his house. And he said, well, why don't you come and have a look at my house and see maybe if you might be able to make the windows for me. And so I went along to his house with really low expectations, I have to admit, as to what I was going to see.
Well, also like just, you know, a normal person's expectation of what a house would be.
Yeah, I was expecting, you know, maybe an extra bay window maybe was going in, or, you know, maybe 3 or 4 windows. And it was on the English-Welsh border, and I drove down to the house down a very large, beautiful driveway. And immediately was thinking, oh, I don't think my expectations were quite right.
Is it one of these things where you like drive through the gate and then the longer the road goes, the more you're imagining like a bigger and bigger, and it sort of dawns on you with every metre.
Yeah. It was exactly that. I do also really love a period film. I'm a bit of a romantic. So I was also like, oh, I think I'm going into a film right now, you know. And I turned up and, you know, really beautiful house, which was pretty much being doubled in size, and it was the estate house and very large, and there were probably around 20 windows roughly to be made with queen mullions, king mullions, string course, coping stones. Oh my goodness, it was everything. Door surround, steps. It was a huge project.
That's for you at that stage of your career, that must have been like, wow, like this is just the best job ever.
The best, I mean, completely overwhelming as well, you know.
Sink or swim?
Yeah, it was a proper sink or swim moment. But the really nice thing was, and this is very, you know, is not very typical in the building industry, it was going slowly, the project. So there was one builder and myself. There wasn't this need for speed. And it's really interesting, this has been a recurring theme throughout my career, is actually I really like making slow, not to the point where, I mean, like tediously slow as in you're never going to make any money because you're not doing it fast enough. But in terms of the fact that you don't need to be a machine and churn it out piece after piece after piece after piece
and
after
also
piece.
where you have maybe a bit of time to sort of sit with the project before you get to the carving stage, so that you have a really informed view of the project by the time you actually get to the creating
absolutely.
parts, right?
And I mean, I'm all one for, you know, when I'm carving, I carve each piece as, you know, each section, I carve it reasonably quickly. That, you know, that's fine. But I'm only ever carving one of them once. You know, there's not that repetition. And so the interesting thing about this building project was I had the time to make, let's say, 2 or 3 windows, and then it would take the builder some time to put all the rubber work in to get up to the right level. And then I would come and fix the windows with him because I had the experience of being on site. So we would fix the windows together, and then more stone would get delivered, and there would be a sort of natural flow of the project, which meant that although the initial things seemed quite overwhelming, it actually started with, well, make one window and let's see how you get on. And then after make one window, it's like, great, could you make the next 2? And so there was only ever like, I was being drip fed it. You know, he was clearly very sensible.
So it was bite-sized chunks,
basically. It was bite-sized chunks, and it was really lovely because he gave me a workshop on site, but he also liked that because then he could come and see the process happening. So it was a really lovely, that was about 2 years. And it was a really lovely way. I feel very fortunate still that he gave me the opportunity to do that, and was a supportive friend throughout it, and that was really nice.
And isn't that so lovely, because, you know, you said a lot of the, and you're right, a lot of the construction industry isn't lovely.
No.
But that's the point, it needn't not be.
Well,
he'd
also been stung
Yeah.
by people letting him down. Yeah. And so the fact that I was on site and I answered my phone, and when I said I was going to make something, I made it, actually meant that he was really happy to put his trust in me, and
I think
it worked
that's
really well.
something that, like, often people feel like there's going to be someone is going to be a winner and someone's going to be a loser.
Yeah.
We can't both walk away happy. Yeah. And it's just not true.
No.
Like, you can have a project where everything you know, things will go wrong within the project, but as in within all the different relationships, if the communication is done right and the expectations are set right and unrealistic pressures put on various people, like everyone can walk away having been paid fairly, delivered good work, etc. Like that is actually possible, and that should be what people aim for.
And I think you're absolutely right that it often comes down to money, and that from the person making it, you need to price your work fairly, and then the person paying for it understands like you were saying, the skill involved, and also the fact that sometimes things go wrong. And so there was a good line of communication, and actually being open and honest was the key thing. And when things go wrong, saying, I made a mistake, I'm going to need to buy a new piece of stone, and explaining that. No one ever really shouts at you for doing that wrong. No. But if you try and hide it, then then it becomes the communication breaks down. So I think you're exactly right. There was for me at that point, I probably needed a little bit of encouragement and hand-holding to go out and do it by myself. I think after a 3-year apprenticeship, I certainly didn't have all the knowledge that I needed, but
you were also probably honest with him about that, right?
Well, he knew what he was taking on, and also I priced it fairly to my ability. So I was pleased with what I was getting, but I'm sure he was as well, because I'm sure he was getting a far better deal employing me than he would have been, a really big company. So it worked both ways, and that was really lovely.
No, that's kind of like the approach I've been having about my own interior design work at the moment. It's like, I'm still in the early stages, and I'm working for someone freelance, but I'm also, finding my own clients. And it's, for me, that initial conversation is saying like, I am not super, I'm not established. I don't know everything.
Still an emerging artist.
So I'm pricing myself accordingly. And I need you to understand that there's a bit of patience required, and also like, getting clients involved who are willing to support someone who's in those like early stages.
And mostly people really want to, don't they?
Yeah, I think so actually.
But again,
not everybody, but
but managing expectations as well. Saying that at the beginning rather than necessarily trying to pull the wool over someone's eyes and pretend you're much more established than you are. Or certainly in the building trade, it was that you could deliver a lot more than you could. So everybody said yes to everything. Even where realistically it was probably a solid no. But they needed the money to come in, so they said yes anyway. And that was the side that I found, really difficult.
Tricky.
So this was kind of the antidote to that 3 years, that I had this very, very wholesome 2 years of working by myself, but with great support. So that was really lovely.
And you also came across someone during that time.
So it was through the house extension that I met. I was introduced to John Neilson, who's just an amazing letter carver, really amazing letter carver, and it was quite funny because we were on the Welsh border, and I went to meet him at his house. And John lives in the most unprepossessing cottage on the side of a Welsh hill in the middle of nowhere with no phone reception.
Right.
And so again, my expectations were lower because of where he was. And I just didn't know anything about the letter carving industry at that point, because I was kind of sort of building an art. I didn't even really know that letter carvers particularly existed. And I remember distinctly turning up at John's house and walking through his garden and seeing these random bits of lettering kind of placed around, and just being completely blown away by how beautiful the letters were. And maybe not being quite as interested in the poetry or anything that was on the stone, but I just couldn't get over the fact that a letter form could be beautiful. And so I ended up working, kind of doing another really informal apprenticeship with John, but this time it was steeped in education. And it's because John himself was a really good teacher and had been in education teaching for a long while. And so he knew how to teach somebody. Thankfully, he really disliked using an angle grinder. And so immediately there was a need for me, because I could shape his headstones for him and do the sort of dirty work. And in exchange, he would teach me the history of lettering, letter carving, and how you would draw this beautiful lettering with pencil on paper. And so we did this lovely exchange to begin with, alongside the work at the house, so I could sort of dip in and out of both. And eventually, as these things naturally develop, there was an opportunity where he needed me to carve some of his lettering in a headstone, which was incredibly nerve-wracking. And it was really the first time I'd used a mallet and chisel, which is quite backwards, because by that point I'd probably been working with stone for about 5 years. And so it started using a mallet and chisel and carving his letters, and he would correct them using red pencil. And so my challenge every morning was to try and have as little red pencil on the stone as possible. And I'm naturally quite competitive, but more so with myself. And so it was this lovely game to me of, oh, how well did I do this morning?
I love that he got to know his students and kind of
yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, he was a really good teacher, so that doesn't surprise me. So we developed this relationship where I would carve his lettering. So I would be a pair of hands for him, and then he would come and put the finishing touches on where they needed to or not. And for me, the challenge was to try and get it so he had to touch the stone as little as possible at the end. And then we'd go off and fix the stones, and that was really interesting because it's a different technique to fixing on a building. And I just learned a huge amount about the letter carving industry. And everybody I met was so welcoming and friendly, and it felt like this extended family of lovely, really traditional craftsmen. And I hadn't really been subject to that before because it had been very much the building industry. Yeah. And so I loved this feeling of handcrafted, the pride everybody had in their work. That was a real eye-opening moment of how I wanted to be working. And it was,
I guess you're right. It's not fine art and construction. You wouldn't really apply like welcoming family as like
no, absolutely no. And I found the art world really, just not very friendly, really, to be honest. So this was the first time I'd found a smaller industry that I thought was just lovely and kind of quaint and sort of quite old-fashioned, and I loved all of those things.
It sounds like it was a very wholesome bubble for a couple of years.
It was really wholesome, and I think I really needed that, actually, as a sort of, as a rest point from coming out of the barrage of the constructions, and being a female in the construction industry as well. Yes. It was a lot. And I suddenly got deposited in this just lovely, exactly as you say, little bubble of just kind-hearted people around me. And I think it was really, exactly what I needed. Yeah.
It's and so how did it feel handling that chisel and mallet for the first time?
I remember it feeling really awkward. When you pick up a pen and try writing in the opposite hand. Yeah. It's that kind of feeling of just like, I don't really know what you do with these things. And it just, letter carving is a great thing to learn on because it's so repetitive. And I started just really like the sound, and to not have to wear like a really heavy duty dust mask and ear defenders and to be covered in dust. And by that point as well, I was also starting to struggle with repetitive strain injury in my hand and forearm muscles being really tired, shoulders, because you're using big machinery, which is designed for men as well. So like even my grip isn't big enough to hold a 9-inch angle grinder. Right. And so the contrast of standing in John's garden, picturing it now, which is just, the most idyllic. It's
going to sound idyllic, yeah.
Really idyllic little cottage. And I remember there was one day when John went out to the shops and I was carving away and he had a goose, and the goose actually didn't like me very much, so I had to watch the goose. But the goose was kind of like pootling around on the grass, and then this tiny little baby bunny rabbit came out, and I remember just carving away thinking like, what is this place? There's just this tiny little rabbit and a goose pootling around. It was all very idyllic, and
it's like Peter Rabbit.
It really was a real Peter Rabbit moment of
And so did that sort of all kind of naturally come to an end, and then like Sitting Guilds kind of happened from there? Like how did that transition occur?
So I think it was through John. I did a letter carving workshop with Eric Marlin in Cambridge and Tom Perkins, and it was on that, I think it was a 3-day course maybe. I met another couple of lovely people, and one of them had maybe been at Sitting Guilds. And so they showed me their portfolio, and I remember just being completely enchanted by the whole thing.
Yeah, because you said you didn't want to go back to education, right?
No, I didn't. I think maybe through John, I'd realised the importance of having a good grounding. And I think it was probably around that time, you were exactly right about saying the holes in my stonemasonry apprenticeship. I think what I had started to realise was how big those holes were. And I had so little confidence in my own abilities because I knew I was really winging it still. That I actually realised that that's what I needed to do, was I actually really wanted a solid foundation, not to go backwards, but to carry on going forwards, to be able to
be able to build up on your skills.
Yeah, and to be able to be confident in my skills and hold my own within the industry. So seeing everything that the art school was teaching and, you know, the eclectic mix of head modelling, life drawing, even some bronze work, stone carving, letter carving.
Yeah, it's really thorough.
It's really thorough and very broad. And I think, I remember going to visit and I immediately knew it was the place I needed to be. And chatting with Nina as well, she was the first female I had met within the industry who had also started out as a stonemason. And I realised in Nina she was going to be such a fantastic teacher because she could also see all the holes in my training, and I needed somebody else to be able to see them, to be able to correct them. And because, although it was a stone carving course, because she had a masonry background, it sort of worked really well for me because I needed somebody to understand the gaps in my education to then be able to push me forwards faster. So I remember having a real connection with Nina and just thinking, gosh, it would be lovely to be taught by a female, but also just how
feeling
much...
like you're in safe hands.
Yeah, absolutely, and just knowing that I was going to be able to learn lots from her. So I embarked on I remember putting my application in, and, you know, I was living in Shropshire at the time, and gosh, the idea of even moving to London was quite a lot, but it just felt like the right thing to do, and I remember taking that leap and just... knowing that you were doing the right thing and being in the right place was really amazing.
And so at what point did you fall in love with stone?
I think quite often people assume that either you set out to be a stone carver or maybe that was why I started, straight after college working with stone. It definitely wasn't until about halfway through the carving course at City and Guilds of London Art School. It was that late on.
So even when you're lettering in the garden and there's the goose and the rabbit, you weren't like fully...
It wasn't about the stone, it was about the process. And actually it had been about the process the whole way through, or the environment or the product. It hadn't been about the stone. And actually I had a second connection with it later on, but the first one came where I guess through the art school, the thing I realised was up until that point, I hadn't known what direction I was heading in. And I found that a bit disconcerting as to I just kept saying yes to opportunities, which is a great thing to do, but with no particular direction. And then I was there on this course where I had exactly the right skill set to be doing that course. And I found that incredibly reassuring that suddenly I had a purpose and
things made sense.
Things made sense, and I just hadn't had that. And I think I had a lot of friends who had a really vocational, they did a vocational degree and then they went into their line of work, and it was a really obvious route for them. And I think it's so rarely the case for a stone carver, or sorry, for any creative person actually, to be honest. But I think having that realisation that actually inherently I'd been working towards being a stone carver for the last 6 years.
Without realising
it, also made me realise that I wanted to work with stone. I also had enough exposure to the wood carving side, because there are parts where the course crosses over. And so the life drawing things, you're in the studio with the wood carvers as well. And so I'd go into their wood carving studio from time to time. I think I actually got banned from picking up any of their chisels because they're so sharp that every time I touched one, I basically cut myself because they're just, so I think I got banned from, touching anything. But I had to go with wood and I hated it.
Really?
Oh my God, the grain, just not my thing at all. I don't understand the fact that they can build up a block of wood. I mean, I do understand it, but but if they want a block, they have to build up the layers and make it themselves.
Yeah.
And I don't even like the fact that you can change your mind. I like the fact that in stone it's there, that's it, that was the decision, you've just got to roll with it. And it's a big block, and so oddly the wood carving side made me realise that it wasn't just I found out I was a carver, I found out I was a stone carver, and stone was the thing for me, not wood.
It's almost you realise your love of it by contrast to your hate of something else. Yeah. I mean, because you'd been working on a range of projects and a range of themes, I guess. How did you go about refining that? Did that happen during the degree course, or?
So I think it's a blessing and a curse that the course had such breadth. I wouldn't have wanted it any other way.
Yeah.
But when you're doing head modelling, life drawing, lettering, bronze work, carving, I mean, how do you make a website for that person? What jobs do you look for coming out of that? Because you're almost kind of a jack of all trades, but you're not, because you've been trained to quite a high standard. So you can sort of dabble in all these different areas. Throughout the diploma, I was working as a restoration carver, and that was really what the course was geared towards, was historic stone carving and restoration. So I worked for a company doing restoration work to the Houses of Parliament, the Cabinet Office, some really amazing places around London. And I enjoyed that work because we were out on site and it was familiar. But to me, it felt a little bit like being a machine, because what you were mostly doing was copying somebody else's work. Maybe it would be very well worn and you had to research what style it should be and elements, but mostly you were replacing something that somebody else had created. And I think what I'd been finding towards the end of the course was that I had a bit more creativity that wasn't quite being scratched.
Yeah.
It's like there was a little itch there that I remember my projects, I always tried to steer it to something that I was creating, not just copying somebody else's piece. There's a lovely piece in the corner here, which was a capital, which I did at college. And it was a piece where you had to, it was a broken plaster cast of it, and you had to repair it with wax and then carve from that. So it was an exercise in carving. But I remember thinking, oh, maybe I could do something, a bit more flamboyant with it, and having to kind of rein myself in, because that wasn't the remit of the course. And so, not that I battled against that, but I was aware of that feeling creeping in. And then, again, I think this was one of those good opportunities that happened. I moved abroad with my husband 3 months after graduating from the course, and we moved to Southeast Asia, and it completely pulled me away from being able to do any restoration carving.
Right.
And at the time, I remember thinking, I don't know if this is the right decision, and I don't know what to do. And it was I found it really difficult, because I didn't know who I was as an artist. I didn't know what my identity was. I was really battling at that point of not being an artist still. So I wouldn't refer to myself as an artist. So it was very much as a stone carver. That was my, And so it was a tough time, but in retrospect, what it gave me was 2 years without any pressure to be able to discover what I was interested in artistically.
Yeah.
And probably to come to terms with the fact that I was an artist working in stone and a stone sculptor, rather than a restoration carver.
And so what were you sort of pulled towards then at that point?
So I was really aware of loving the process of letter carving. Of my own limitations, I'd never felt comfortable drawing the lettering.
Okay.
The part of working with John that I'd liked the most was carving his work. I'd worked as a pair of hands for other letter carvers in London, and that was the thing that I really enjoyed. So I was aware of that. I had always loved pattern, and I'd started experimenting with Zentangles and doodles and that kind of thing. And I was interested in whether I could link up those two things together. And I think whilst living in Asia, the other thing that happened was the Islamic art that was around me just started to slowly sink in. I wasn't seeking it out, but actually it became my sort of everyday patterns that I saw was suddenly geometric and Islamic, rather than Western patterns, which are quite different and probably way more varied as well. I was probably seeing more of a niche of pattern. And then, you know, the sacred geometry of the rainforest I became really aware of as well. And so I think those things, in retrospect now, started sinking into the work that I started making. And I don't know if I would have got there if I hadn't gone away, but I can certainly see that was the catalyst for that beginning part. And also, this slips into where my love of British stone came from.
Right.
Because the being abroad made me, at the same time, quite homesick.
Yeah.
People came out to visit, so I oddly wasn't homesick for people in the same way, because, you know, you could FaceTime and you could catch up. But, oh my goodness, I missed the green rolling hills. The green and pleasant land was a thing. I missed the duck and the rabbit. You know, that was the thing I missed. And so when I was able to carve, it was a piece of Welsh slate actually.
Yeah.
When I carved this piece of Welsh slate, oh my goodness, the sense of connection with a piece of stone. I mean, this really does sound slightly potty, doesn't it?
No, but it's a sort of coming home, and it's really lovely.
It was my bedrock. It was the thing I was familiar with. Even like each stone has a slightly different smell when you're cutting it.
Right.
And even the smell of the Welsh slate. And it reminded me of being at John's house and all of these lovely things.
Yeah.
And so I realised at that point that actually it was British stone. I'm just very British. And carving British stone was just the thing.
But it does, you know, sometimes it takes being away from home to appreciate home even more.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. And that was just so strongly what happened.
Yeah.
And I will carve other things now. But in terms of connection, you know, a really lovely piece of Portland limestone is just, you know, it's so close to where we are now. It's a really lovely thing. And that it hasn't travelled. And yeah, I think it's a really lovely thing. It's of the place that you're from. Incredibly grounding. It's lovely.
Yeah. And you said something to me, you know, on the topic of geometry. You said that you haven't had formal training in drawing with geometry, right?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think it's probably something that I will look into at some point, in the same way that I had need of City and Guilds of London Art School to fill in the holes of my masonry. I suspect at some point I'll want to learn more about the history of geometric patterns so that I can understand. I mean, at the moment, it's just my own exploration of geometry. And I guess in some ways, slightly reinventing the wheel, I'm learning the proportions and how you set them out just through what I think looks right, rather than necessarily understanding the rules behind it.
The School of Traditional Arts has lots of short courses and things like that, right?
I did one.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah. And actually, so that side of it happened during lockdown. So we came back from Southeast Asia just at the tail end of 2018. So 2019 was when I started carving geometry, which was also the same time I had my son as well. And so I sort of had a baby and all this geometry just started coming out of my head. You know? When you have a newborn, you have quite a lot of time of sitting and, you know, not actually being mentally as active. And so what I started doing was working out how I would carve this particular geometric pattern. And so I had a lot of thinking time. And so as soon as I managed to get a chisel in my hand, that was what started coming out. But so we were saying about the geometry learning came a year later when we started lockdown. And I think there are, looking back on it, probably lots of reasons why geometry was the right thing at that time for me as well. I really like the order of it. And I think I find it very visually satisfying but reassuring. It has a definite right and wrong placement. So you draw a line and you know it's either in the right place or it's not. You know, there's no ambiguity. And I think that was one of the things I struggled with the drawing of the lettering. And so it was answering all of those questions. It was also, for me, providing me with, you know, gosh, with lockdown going on, I just remember the uncertainty and the concern and the worry. And geometric pattern was this incredibly grounding thing that was completely different. And carving it is just the perfect level of challenge, that it means it takes all of your focus and attention. So I was carving away, you know, whilst my son was having a sleep, and you couldn't possibly think, have I put the washing in? Did I do this? Should I have done that? Is my mum going to be okay? You know, all of those kind of repetitive thoughts that were going round, I was concentrating on this little section here of carving, and that was the thing that that was just the thing I needed to do. And so it actually gave me a lot of headspace, and it was at that point that I realised how good it was for my mental well-being, and that I found carving geometry a form of meditation. There's a little education behind my geometry, but then really what I wanted to do was spend time just playing with pattern. And so my work really is a documentation of my understanding of geometry, and then later on to spherical geometry. And it's really just me documenting my education.
I love that. You've done other types of work as well. And I mean, I guess that it might be an interesting thing to talk about is, you know, you talk about having worked in restoration, being a stonemason, etc., and you've sort of find, you know, the geometry aspect is what you want to push, what you want to sort of say as an artist. But here we have this
the rope knot.
The rope knot. And so how did this come about?
The rope knot has been an interesting piece of work. The rope knot is my friend. It was actually whilst I was at City Guilds of London Art School, there was a carving competition for London Craft Week.
Yes.
I think it was the first time the art school had run a carving competition at the same time. And I was in my third year, and I remember it being a really busy time and thinking, God, I'm not sure if I want to do this. And I think we had 2.5 days, maybe, and a lump of stone. And the theme was the Thames. And I thought, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I remember thinking outside the box a little bit and trying to work out what I wanted. And my dad used to be in the Merchant Navy, and I spoke to him about it. And I was like, are there any cool knots? Because I grew up with him kind of making all sorts of knots and things. And I said, are there any cool knots that I could do that would fit? I've got a piece of stone that's 200 by 200, you know, what do you think? And he was like, oh, I mean, you could do a monkey fist knot. And I was like, oh, like the things we used to put on the keys. And he was like, yeah, the things we used to put on the keys. So I was like, oh, is there any chance that you could make me a one to scale? And he was like, oh, that's going to take a lot of rope. But my dad had retired, so he took on the mantle of making this lovely rope knot for me.
Yeah.
And then for the carving competition, that's what I did, was carve the rope knot. And it's really nice because it's actually, in terms of a masonry shape, it's relatively simple because it's interlocking panels that are all the same. And then you can split it up into, you know, each one has 3, and then the number of turns on the rope.
So for someone who doesn't like ambiguity, it's actually a lovely way of, there's texture to it, but there's also an element of regularity, right?
It's like the perfect combination for me. And I carved it, and I think it was really nice because it was a thing. It was a tangible thing. It went right underneath as well. You could hold it, and it looked like a rope knot. And very nicely, I won the public vote for which piece they liked the most. And I think it was one of the, I think it was the master of the Worshipful Company of Masons who bought it. So it was really nice. And then very nicely, somebody else commissioned one because they'd seen it and they wanted it as well. So the summer after college, I ended up actually carving 3 rope knots that summer.
Right. So just before you went Southeast Asia, basically.
Yeah. And we were getting married as well. So there was this really highbrow, lowbrow moment of trying on wedding dresses covered in dust because you just spent the day carving a rope knot, you know. but tying the knot, you know, it was all really nice. It was really nice. And so I carved it. I then didn't carve one for 2 years whilst I was away. And then when I came back, it's been, I mean, I must carve 2 or 3 every year.
Oh, I love that. That's nice.
I don't really promote them particularly because clearly it's the geometry is my thing. But there's nearly always a commission about to happen. There are 2 spheres sat over there.
Which are going to be...
One of those, the one on the left, is Bath stone and will be a rope knot. So that's the next one. And it's just like a really nice friend that I revisit every so often. It gives me, exactly as you're saying, a bit more freedom. Each one has its own character. And it's really nice when I'm carving the precision of geometric patterns to have something that's a bit freer and
to go through and sort of alternate.
Yeah. So for this one, I had one that I'd done 3D scanned.
Yeah.
And that was a really interesting process. I had been working on a commission for a school, for Camford School, and to celebrate their centenary, I had carved a larger sphere. Which embodied their core values. And they had 4 couplets of core values. And so it had 4 interlocking smaller circles and 4 interlocking larger circles. And what they wanted to do was to be able to give something, or for the alumni to be able to have something, to be able to buy something. And so I 3D scanned that larger one and then reduced it in size, and we made a Jesmonite cast, which the pupils can buy or the alumni can buy, so you can take a little of Camford School with you as a reminder of these core values and how you should carry them through your life. So from that process, I then scanned this one to make a bronze effect rope knot.
And so that was actually the first time that you sort of, because you did mention this at the beginning, sort of playing with iterating, sort of replicating pieces. Yeah. Was that the sort of start of realising that you could do that? Yeah, absolutely. And I think as a business, it's really important to have these different tiers of price points, so that you can, market your work in different ways. And I've also now made I'm in the process of making a really tiny one, which is going to be as a piece of door furniture, so you can have it as a handle. And it's going to be cast in metal, so that you could have it as a draw pull or light pull. Oh, that's great.
And it's just, I think it's really fun. I don't get to play necessarily with multiple products all that often. And I think it's really fun to have the other side of the business to be able to do that with is really good.
So you're now talking, you've talked about being an artist.
Yeah.
But now you're talking about a business.
Yeah.
And we've talked, you mentioned just very briefly, I market these, I don't market these.
Yes.
So can we sort of get into that side of things?
I think that there was a realisation point for me, was the beginning of lockdown. We were living in Scotland at the time, and I was carving this new geometric pattern, which I was really excited about, but I was very aware that if I didn't start promoting it, particularly during lockdown, there was a possibility that nobody would ever see it. And that wasn't what I wanted for it. I wanted to share it. I also didn't even know at that point how it was going to be received by peers or what anybody would think of it. So I started posting to Instagram, I started using social media, and I also, because I had time, I built a website. And I guess that was my first kind of introduction into marketing. And there was a project which was just a card. The point was it's not just a card. And I joined this group and started working with people to help with social media and understanding how to promote your work. And it's as important for an artist to have a business sense as it is to just create the work if you want to sell. And so the more I posted on social media, which was actually kind of an antidote to my family, because I was the only person making anything in my family, and they're all furloughed and all sorts of things. And so they used to ring me up and pester me and sort of say, what are you doing? Tell me about the studio. What are you doing? What are you making? Show me a photo. I was like, all right. And then I'd finish that conversation with my brother, and then my mum would ring and be like, what are you making today? And I was like, oh my goodness, guys, So I was like, right, get an Instagram account and just look.
Yeah.
And so I started posting daily-ish.
Almost thinking, oh, I'm posting to my family.
Exactly that. And I still do. If I do a story on social media, I'm talking to my mum. And so I started posting things which clearly hit home to other people because I was doing it in quite a personal way. And so I started to gain a few followers and I was like, oh, this is an interesting free marketing thing. And eventually, it did take me a while to start posting reels, but I eventually did post a reel. And whereas my stories have been getting, I don't know, 40 views or something like that, and posts of maybe getting 120, I put a reel out and it got 2,000 views within about an hour. And I was like, wow. I mean, this is what you need to be doing, is reels, because clearly that's going to a lot of people. And so I started making reels, and it was whilst I was on holiday in Cornwall. So lockdown must have just finished. There was like a break in lockdown, managed to go to Cornwall on holiday, a staycation, and had no reception. And whilst I was there, one of my reels started basically going viral.
Right.
And my mum...
But you were unaware of it?
Well, semi-unaware of it. My mum, who was clearly pressing refresh every 30 seconds on my Instagram account, was also then texting me every 30 seconds. Like, oh my goodness, look at this, you've got this many followers now. Oh my goodness, it's got this many views. And it got to a point where I was like, you're going to have to stop sending me messages. Because my phone was just constantly, when it got reception, it was like, bing, 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 so if I went up a hill, it was ridiculous, So whilst I was in Cornwall...
I'm sort of thinking it's like, when you go like people like searching for like metal or something and all of a sudden their fingers...
Yeah, that was basically what happened. And it was the second that I got reception, I just had to switch my phone off in the end because my mum was just, very enthusiastic about it. But it was on, I remember driving home and it pipped over 1 million views on the drive home.
God.
I was like, this is insane, insane a number of people. And my followers started to climb as well. And so I carried on posting, and actually I think that reel got, I think it got about 5 million views in the end, something that was, really significant. And the more I posted to social media and the more consistent I was, and also at that time it was really popular.
Yeah, I think the heydays of Instagram was really...
Yeah, I was definitely there.
2020.
Yeah, I was there at the right time, definitely. And I had another reel just afterwards that had 22 million views. And, it just is an insane number of people. So I've now got 160,000 followers, which is kind of its own beast. Mm-hmm. And so I get interesting opportunities through that. Some sales, and this is the thing that everybody always wants to know, is how many direct sales come through it. And there are some, but it's usually the opportunities that are more apparent than the sales. I had a really lovely editorial in Country Living magazine, and that was because somebody had seen my Instagram account. Mm-hmm. And then it was through Country Living magazine that I exhibited last year with the Hannah Pesha Sculpture Garden. And it was because one of their curators had seen the Country Living magazine. So you can sort of see the link. And then
the ramifications sort of
Absolutely. So it's an incredibly useful tool. But it did make me realise how important the business side is to your art practice.
And what you put out.
Yeah, absolutely. What you put out and what you want people to do, which is why I don't actually actively market the rope knot particularly, because I want to be known for the geometric pattern more than the rope carving. I mean, it's all me, but for galleries and curators and buyers, this is my aesthetic rather than necessarily the rope knot. So I think that's the...
Yeah, so you can do anything in stone and you will gladly take on
and I still do. Right? And I still do take on... I've got a commission at the moment, which is, I'm carving a tree in a piece of stone. The nice thing is I get to pick and choose when I want to do those. I still love it when the commission is a geometric pattern or a sphere or something where it's a commission that's my work. Yeah. They're always the ones I probably end up getting most excited about. Yeah. But there's always a balance with how many commissions you need to take on and how much of your own work you do anyway. and I clearly can be selective over which I put out to social media and which I don't, to encourage more of the type of commissions that I want to do.
So what does having a successful practice mean to you right now?
That's a really good question. I think feeling successful is something that I know I'm not the only craftsperson who feels this. It's really hard to work out whether you feel successful or not. And clearly a lot of that is to do with how you measure success. It's hard to not measure success through finances. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, you know, it's not like I've got a hugely flush bank account, and I do need to take on commissions to make sure that the business stays affluent. And you know, there is a real juggle of, if you do too much of your own work for galleries, which is speculative, and you don't sell it, how do you pay next month's rent? So you do need to take on some of those commissions. So I do find it hard not to link that to whether I feel successful or not. There's the idea that success, yes, I have some Instagram followers, but actually that doesn't really relate to being successful. So the thing that I've kind of come round to, which makes me feel more comfortable, is the idea of, at the end of the day, how much I have enjoyed that day. Mm-hmm. And I try, where possible, to value success, or to pin success on happiness, which sounds a bit open-ended, but actually I am in a studio which I adore. I can drop my son off at school, take the dog for a walk, have a productive day running my business, carving, dealing with clients and all of those factors, and go home in the evening and be happy and fulfilled. That to me is a successful day. Don't get me wrong, I'm still always striving for the next goalpost and the next exciting exhibition, or the industry recognition, or whatever it might be. But I try, where possible, to see success as actually running a practice which is sustaining and enjoyable.
Yeah. Do you feel like part of that...
You didn't sound utterly convinced.
No, well, the thing is, like, you need to set goals in such a way that they are achievable, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel like if you said to yourself success is being financially successful, do you feel like that would be a realistic goal as a craftsperson in the landscape?
No, I don't. And I think it's really difficult, because if I just said it was to do with finances, I would say I was unsuccessful. And that's tough, and I don't think people talk about it enough in the industry. I'm really aware of the fact that we're forever promoting bringing on the next generation, but it sometimes sits quite uncomfortably, because actually I don't know I would necessarily promote this to the next generation, because it's hard work. And yes, some people have great successes financially as well. I find I have a very supportive family, which is, I'm really privileged to be in that position. Mm-hmm. If I was a single parent trying to do this, I don't think I'd be able to be a carver. So I think it's really hard to be honest about that and inspire others, because I want the creative industry to carry on and oh my goodness. And I absolutely love my day-to-day carving. You know, there's nothing better than being self-employed. You know, when I sell a piece of work, that is just genuinely the best feeling in the world. It's really lovely. And particularly if it's somebody who really connects with your work, that you've made something, you've considered it, and they also feel that connection through your work. I mean, that's really golden. But financially, it's not an easy task to try and get people to buy your work. You know, people aren't investing in craft in the same way they used to. So it's forever playing a game of, like I say, prints, casts. You know, I'm developing a Christmas bauble. It's this constant game, which I really enjoy. Mm-hmm. But it would be nice if there was more financial gain from that. Yeah, it's a really tough situation. It's almost like a privileged thing to be able to do it. Yeah. And I'm always aware of the fact that I sit in a position where I don't have quite the same stresses and strains because of having family support with it. It doesn't mean for a second, though, that I'm not as keen and eager to be able to do that myself. And, you know, I just always feel like there's this little, like, burning flame inside, just constantly saying, like, you know, you just keep doing it. It's going to happen. You just have to keep doing it. Yeah. And, you know, and I do genuinely adore every day. Like, I wouldn't want to not be doing it, but it's really tough if you are required to make X amount every month. It's a really tough industry to be in because it fluctuates so much.
Yeah, and quite often with things completely outside of your control. Like it could be, like at the moment it is, you know, because there's so much happening politically, it affects actually how people feel about spending their money, and then that actually like trickles down to are people spending on crafts. It's like a direct correlation, and you know, you can even see it at like the interior design level. You know, I remember someone telling me, oh, we've got no work right now because we're waiting for Brexit results to come through. And it was like people were kind of holding back their funds because they were like, oh, we don't know whether we're going to be going ahead with this project because, I don't know, maybe they've got investments there or this, but you just, and so you've got such big level stuff that is totally, you know, you could be doing, as you say, like you're posting on Instagram and your newsletter and this and that, but actually there's just some things that you can't control that affect that pipeline of orders.
And then it's odd, isn't it? Because I'm not my target audience, because I don't have I mean, you know, we don't have a monthly budget that we spend on art, you know, who has that? You know? So then it's quite difficult because then you end up inevitably undervaluing yourself because I know I wouldn't be in a position to afford to buy my carving. It doesn't mean I don't think it's worth that. But it's a really difficult balance of whether you then reduce your price to try and sell more. But then the difficulty is if you start reducing your price, you may then end up having to carve a lot more of those pieces to make the same amount of money, and then you start turning into a bit of a machine.
And you've anyway got so many hours in the day, and then you then get back into the problem of what you were talking at one point about, like you feel it on your body. Because at the end of the day, you are physically making something. It's not like you can go faster, so therefore it means just working longer hours, less rests, more issues with ergonomy in a way. And
yes, exactly. So you're in this sort of vicious cycle. And I think the thing I came to terms with is I'm probably going to produce 8 sculptures a year, realistically, maybe 10. And so there's a lot of marketing of those 10 pieces of work. But in that case, those 10 pieces of work need to have a high enough price that they are 10, you know, that's your year's income is in those 10 pieces of work. Which is why the cast, the prints, I teach carving workshops as well. Those sort of things are the things that actually keep the day-to-day business running. And then, I mean, you know, goodness, I just need a gallery to take me on and find a few buyers who would love my work. And that's the bit. But it's very speculative, and that's quite hard.
Yeah, because then, as you say, it's like planning and things like paying your studio. And then there's also getting into like shows and things like that, which require a lot of like upfront payment, and you don't know whether you get that return, right?
Yes, absolutely, and that's difficult because you want to promote your stuff, and you know, all of this sort of marketing and business side is not something I was trained in. I think I have, again, good support from the family in terms of helping me make decisions which seem logical, and even just having the, you know, emotional support of saying, like, do you think this is the right thing to do? You know, again, that's a privilege to have that support even from your family, and not something that everybody has. But it's not something I was trained in. So I'm constantly learning how to run the business in a successful way. And try and sort of remove the creative cap and sort of say, well, you know, is this selling? Is that selling? Do I need to make more of this? Should I be spending more time doing that? You know, it's a constant juggle. However, the last thing I'd want to be doing would be being quiet and sitting at home and not doing anything. You know, this is the happy place. It's just reminding yourself that you are actually doing the thing that makes you happy.
I know you've said, oh, I try to consider each day as, did I enjoy my day? But you are also extremely like business driven. Yeah. But that transition has not been an easy one, right? There's sort of, I feel like the learning elements, like it's, you know, you do can come across people along the way who are willing to teach you, etc. But like getting to where you are with having, you know, building up interest and a client base and establishing a business, like that can't be easy because no one's going to do that for you, right?
No, and it was interesting, I think, because the Sitting Guilds of London Art School course had an intention that you become a restoration carver. I didn't necessarily get much of the education around how you approach galleries. I sort of had a small sense of that from my degree, but that was quite a long time ago. So
the fine art degree.
The fine art degree, it was quite a long time ago. My memory's not great, and also, you know, it wasn't quite as relevant as to how to approach. Things have changed a little bit. So I definitely felt a gap, which I felt actually more when I came back from living abroad, and I feel like sort of 2019 was the beginning of my geometric business, if you like, of the being a self-employed stone carver in the UK as a sort of sculptor. It was how you get your work into a gallery. That sort of side of it, I felt there was a real gap in my knowledge. As to how you fundamentally even how do you even approach a gallery? I was really fortunate that I'm a QEST scholar, the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Trust, and they were very supportive. There was lots of opportunities which you could apply for. So I found that side really helpful, but I also had some really great friends who were maybe just a step further in front of me on their journey, and I still do have friends, and I think having the support from fellow craftspeople who are kind of colleagues, kind of friends, you know, that sit in that category. Maybe you don't see them all the time, but they're the person you can ring up and ask advice. They're kind of a bit like mentors. Had particularly at that point, great friend Alys Wilson, who's a ceramicist, and I remember she was exhibiting with a gallery, and I remember just saying to her, like, Alys, how do you do that? Like, what did you do? How did you say that? How did that conversation go? And even just her telling me about, you know, how she worded her artist statement or her biography, like those are things I hadn't even written at that point. And so Alys certainly really helped me see how to start that approach happening. And I think it was a lot for me of slightly reinventing the wheel. There are definitely, when you're looking at galleries and approaching galleries, you need to be able to make sure that your work is the type of work that sits well in their body of people that they exhibit. So, I mean, if you're looking at a gallery and it has lots of oil paintings and you're a stone carver, it's not the gallery for you. And it was learning also to be able to see, you shouldn't just randomly apply to lots of places. You need to actually be really considered, go and visit the gallery, make sure it's the sort of style that you could see your work being there. And what tended to happen kind of naturally was the ones that you aspire to exhibiting with are probably the ones that you should be approaching, because there's a reason why you aspire to exhibiting with them. It's still something I really have to work on, because interestingly, I'm fine with talking about my work on Instagram, but actually approaching a gallery and saying, excuse me, would you like to exhibit my stuff? I get really nervous about. And I think it's because, you know, a lot of it is to do with rejection. You get a lot of rejection, of course, before you get successes. And it's just having that thick skin that your work is very personal to yourself, and it's, you know, it's a business transaction is what's happening, not them criticising you. And it's just remembering that and keeping a thick skin. But I definitely found that bit, that first bit was kind of
Tricky.
hard going. Yeah.
But even you've mentioned writing a couple of times now, right? Like you talk about like the QEST opportunities and having to submit applications, and then now you're reaching out to galleries. Like, I mean, did you have any help sort of developing confidence around writing?
So actually writing was something I really hated.
Okay.
I am dyslexic and struggled at school with writing. And my mum was always my writing support. So she was a teacher. And so she would write with me. And that's how we sort of developed a technique of writing kind of together. But it was my words that she was writing. And it was definitely, I do remember not wanting to go to City and Guilds Art School because you had to write a dissertation. Oh. And I remember being so worried about the dissertation in the third year that I wasn't sure I wanted to do the course. I definitely remember actually considering whether I should go or not.
Right, okay.
And actually they were brilliant because they had a writing fellow. And so I signed up for weekly sessions, is it weekly or bi-weekly? I can't remember, with the writing fellow. And he was amazing because he broke down the dissertation for me. It's like introduction, but more than that, he structured it. And I don't think I'd ever really grasped the structure of a piece of writing. And he gave me such tiny little bite-sized pieces to do. And we had so much, I think I did it for the whole of my third year.
Oh my God.
But I'd have to write 200 words 1 week. And I could do that. That was okay. And so we would build it up until actually when I got to the end of it, I could see the structure, all of it was there, and then the editing of it became much, much easier.
And so do you feel like you still kind of use that sort of knowledge that you acquired then when you're writing applications, even though it's much smaller?
I think the thing that it massively did was gave me confidence that actually I could do it. And certainly in the first year of the diploma, I spent most of my evenings writing application forms because I didn't have enough money to complete the course. So the need was really, really big. And so I just applied to every bit of funding that I could find. Again, hats off to my mum here because she spent a lot of time trawling the internet, finding the things for me to apply for. And then I would do all the applying. Yeah. So I got so used to writing application forms that I think they then become easier. And even the way you talk about your work, you of course can save those bits of writing and then revisit them and rejig them. And so I sort of started to build up almost like a portfolio of answers to things. And it's really interesting because it makes you consider your work differently. Yeah. And, if somebody asks me, why geometry? Like, what does that make you feel? It's a question I've answered a number of times, clearly. And so I'm now more familiar with what the answer's going to be. And so the writing became easier. And I basically just discovered I'm more confident now writing about myself. Because for me, the dyslexia side, it's more about the processing. So actually the fact that I'm just telling you about me is much easier. And so I think, the writing fellow massively helped. This newfound writing confidence did. And I now, I have to write about on my website lots. I still apply for things left, right and centre because, what's the worst that can happen with an application form? You don't get in. But actually that's where a lot of my early opportunities came from was QEST applications for, all sorts of things. The John Smedley knitwear brand ambassador,
But so it's quite interesting because I feel like, to sort of go back to that question about, sort of establishing yourself, after you, after you finish your training and sort of getting to where you are. It sounds like it's been a mix of, as you say, reaching out to your network, to friends who are ahead of you, mentors, etc. But also sort of like setting goals and really putting yourself out there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And building a brand identity, I guess. You need to educate your buyers as to who you are, and you need to put that in writing so that people who can actually kind of access and understand your practice and what you're about, so that they might want to invest in your work. So, I think a lot of it is to do with the writing behind it, and having, like you say, quite clear goals. I do have mentoring sessions from time to time that I find really, really helpful. There's a particular one, the Parker Harris Art Ladder, that I really like.
Yeah.
And it's even just over a year. I set myself 3-month goals. You know, I have a 5-year plan.
Yeah.
Of what the aspiration is in 5 years' time, and then it's looking back. So, what do you need to achieve year 1, 2, 3, 4 to get there, and breaking it down.
I do that too.
Yeah. And I find the 3-month thing is great. So, back end of last year, the 3-month goal was to launch a new website, which I did. The beginning of this year, it was all getting ready for Collect Art Fair. So that was more of a making 3 months, making new work. And I'm now sitting in the making a new actual paper portfolio, 10 images of my work, so that I can approach galleries and have a renewed sense of, you know, please exhibit my work.
Yeah.
And then we'll see what the next 3 months instalment is. But I find things like that are really important for keeping me on track, and they're things
driven. And also, as you say, because you do face so much rejection, and you might go, I mean, I don't know you don't have to answer that, but, you know, it might be months without selling a piece. And so actually to set yourself goals so that you feel like you are achieving, you know, and that sense of like achievement that you get
that you
from
keep
it.
rolling on.
Yes.
And it's not just about the sale of the pieces, because you never know when that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. There will be, you know, there are times when I think, I'm feeling really flat in the business. It feels really unexciting at the moment. But actually, it's looking back at your 3-month plan and saying, I achieved that, I did well there, I achieved this, right, what is this 3 months? And just really almost just getting your head down and keeping on doing it when it feels like it's a bit flat at the moment, you know.
You do need a huge amount of self-motivation to be in this.
Yeah, absolutely. By the time I get home in the evening, I have no motivation left. That's it, I'm done.
So what's a project that's keeping you inspired at the moment?
I have a really nice project in America, Alys Beach. And the reason it's a particularly exciting one is quite often carving gets to be the last bit of the project, or it's a piece that somebody is buying for a garden that's already there, which is lovely, and I'm not knocking that, but it's very rare that you get included in at the beginning of a project or earlier on. And so in actual fact, they don't need my carving until well into next year.
Yeah.
But I've had a conversation with an architect and the builder, and my carving is integral to the building, which is really exciting because it's more of a nod back to like the arts and crafts movement where craft is important. And I think that's the reason I'm finding it particularly exciting, is because it makes me feel more important.
Yeah, well, it feels like your work is being considered.
Yeah, absolutely. And given the kind of platform that you want it to have.
Yeah.
So that project's really exciting. I'm really looking forward to seeing how that one develops over the next year.
I guess final question. What is a dream commission then?
Oh, dream commission.
I'm like how, because I know you're quite ambitious, so I'm like, where's she going to go with it?
I mean, I would love to have a huge project that pays incredibly well, which would mean I could just carve away at it happily for a year. That would be really nice. If I could have that one, that would be amazing.
And take your business to the next level, right?
Of course,
Because you can then reinvest that in the business.
But then also, like, I could take on an apprentice and all of those things that I would love to be able to do. And you're absolutely right, to be able to see the business, actually soaring would be incredibly satisfying. I think on an actual, like, practical, what would I like to do with my carving? I've just started getting more into garden sculpture or outdoor sculpture, and I would love to have either a public commission or a commission for a garden sculpture, which was a bigger piece.
Yeah.
It can be quite difficult to take a leap in size because you have to pay for more stone. And so financially that can be quite tricky. But the new disc that I've started carving recently, I think I would love to do a bigger scale version of that. It's the first time I've pierced through a stone, and I would love to be able to see that larger and outdoors, so that you could see through into other elements of the garden. And
almost
I think
like
that
tracery.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that would be my sort of perfect commission at the moment to develop my work.
And so then, in the same way that you love with your American project, where you were involved quite early on, would you almost love to be involved, like with the garden designer?
With an architect or garden designer. Yeah, actually, even better if it was they were building a new house, and so you could look from a view from the house. That would be really nice. Yeah,
oh, that sounds dreamy.
Yeah, it really does. Can I have that, please?
Hello, watching.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, garden architects. That would be really nice. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's been wonderful, and I feel like it's been a very entertaining conversation. Hopefully everyone watching will agree. And I also appreciate, how honest you've been with, the difficulties of the business, but also like the things that you can do proactively as a maker to sort of keep yourself motivated and going, and the sort of remit of things you can control.
Yeah, thank you.
I've linked Zoe's website below, where you'll find original artworks, casts and prints available for sale. Let us know in the comments below which public garden you think would be the perfect space for Zoe's work. Thank you for watching. It means a lot, especially as at the moment this channel is entirely self-funded. So please spread the word. Like, share and subscribe. See you next week. Yeah, so could you...
I'm really sorry. I'll come back in a second. I really wish I hadn't said the word double fly.